Good afternoon. It is my pleasure to introduce Katharina Greve, and today she is going to present Bridging the Co-Creation Gaps Between Co-Creators, Companies and Living Labs. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Veronica. My name is Katharina, and I have to apologize for my voice. I have a little bit of a cold, but that shouldn't stop us from talking about co-creation. So at this point, I'd like to acknowledge the support and collaboration with Friedrich Alexander University in Nuremberg and Joseph's, our case study in Nuremberg, together with Fraunhofer Institute. So some of the key industry challenges. Here we go. So some of the key industry challenges that we can observe is first the increasing pressure for companies to reduce time to market, and at the same time also the cost of introducing new products and services. And we can see that passive consumers of the past are now more involved and more active innovators in the process of innovating products and services. So we can see that co-creation capabilities for companies are really critical to the future growth of a company. And for this reason, Living Labs offer a new platform to engage with those customers in the process of co-creation. So this is really to understand the existing and emerging user needs. What I mean with co-creation is essentially a collective creativity that is resulting in something that is not known in advance. And I think the focus of not known in advance is very important because it is not a term that sets out outcomes in advance. It's about creativity together with your customers where outcomes are not known. On the other hand, a living lab can be a physical space, but also a virtual space, and it involves different stakeholders, for instance, universities, companies, different institutes, users, and this is for the creation, prototyping, validating, testing of new technologies, services, products, and systems in a real-life context. And the real-life context is very important to really test your prototypes in a situation that is nearly real life, to really observe what your customers think and feel about these products and services. So the case study we selected is Joseph's. You might have heard of it, and I'd like to introduce it very briefly. It is a living lab established in 2014 in the town center of Nuremberg. It offers 5 co-creation spaces to companies at a time, and it operates under one theme which rotates every 3 months. The Living Lab is open to the public and is a project of Fraunhofer Center for Applied Research for Supply Chain Services and the Chair of Information Systems 1 at the University Erlangen. One of the key principles of Joseph's is actually to create a very fun atmosphere to allow customers to try, touch these prototypes and to have a very interactive process. So what you can see here on the photo is Dr. Veronica Martinez and myself, and I'm trying out a video game that is controlled by movements of my arms. So this creative and interactive co-creation process is trying to attract as many people as possible and then also attract them to leave feedback. So to better explain what Joseph's is and what it looks like, I'd like to show you a very short video. Just 1 second. So this is Joseph's from inside. You can see the different areas. You have a member of staff that is showing you around the different business islands, and it's providing you information about the company's prototypes, and you can leave feedback, whether this is on sticky notes, through technology or more sophisticated tools that capture your feedback. You're encouraged, as I said, to try out prototypes. and then leave feedback. Often this is supported by Fraunhofer technology. We can see here their workshops. Companies can go deeper into the material, do lead user workshops. You can see here the so-called real liker, which is the way to capture feedback through thumbs up, and more traditional methods where your guide will capture your comments and ask you about specific impressions that you have. There's also one coffee shop that attracts visitors if you just want to stop by, and then you're encouraged to further explore the space. Going back to our presentation, we can describe the co-creation process at Joseph's in 3 different phases. So first of all, a new theme for the upcoming theme world is decided on, and Joseph's is then reaching out to companies that could potentially be interested in involving real users in this innovation process. And the primary function of this briefing in the first phase is actually to clarify Joseph's concept, set realistic expectations for the collaboration with Josephs and the users. And this meeting is also an opportunity to address any questions the company may have. So one of the key objectives of this phase is to establish a research question that the company would like to find answers to during the 3 months they're spending at Joseph's, and also they would like to establish a research design and the methods they can use in order to capture the feedback. So the data collection tools range from simple surveys to very interactive and technology supportive tools. Joseph's thereby always emphasize the importance of haptics and interactivity as a way to collect user feedback. Phase 2 is the start of the actual theme world, where visitors are invited to try prototypes and participate in the co-creation of new products and services. It is worth mentioning at this stage that not every person that goes into Joseph's is becoming a co-creator. At this stage, the person is a visitor. At a point where the person gets involved and tries out and leaves feedback regarding some of the prototypes, he or she is becoming a co-creator. So feedback from around 1,000 co-creators is collected during this time, and interim results on a bi-weekly basis or monthly basis, depending on the company agreement, is provided in order to reiterate prototypes and then bring forward a new version of it to collect new feedback. In the third phase, the qualitative and quantitative analysis is taking place. It is based on the feedback that was collected during the 3 months, and based on the individual agreement with the company, a report or presentation is delivered back to the company. And these results will cover recommendations for action as well. So finally, as part of the third phase, Joseph's conducts a follow-up interview to determine then how this feedback is implemented and assess overall long-term outcomes of the co-creation project. Overall, they can observe around 3,000 visitors during this theme world. So just a snapshot, a summary of 2.5 years. We can see that Joseph's hosted 11 theme worlds and more than 700 events, worked with 62 research partners, and had almost 30,000 people that were visiting and co-creating in this space. So for us, what is quite interesting is, although industry and academia agree that co-creation is very important in order to foster innovation, that living lab practices are actually under-researched. And we could also see that it's really complex to understand the different stakeholders that are involved in this co-creation process in a living lab like Joseph's, because they have different interests. And there's one specific paper by Rosado that highlights that there's a need for more specific description of the practice of running a living lab and how to involve different stakeholders, and also reconciling the interests of these different stakeholders. And for that reason, with our study, we try to explore and analyze elements that are really critical to the facilitation of a co-creation process in living labs. And by doing this, we integrate findings from existing literature with primary data collected with managers, researchers of Joseph's, and the companies that used the space together with co-creators that provided the feedback. So the approach we've taken to conduct this study, it's very exploratory. We used a case study that I just introduced, and we try to contrast what theory says versus practice. So we conducted a systematic literature review. We were running a couple of workshops with the Living Lab staff. We run a workshop with the companies that use the space, and also with co-creators to get a very comprehensive picture. Finally, we did some data coding, triangulation, and then conducted a thematic analysis. To give you a bit more insight into our literature review, we performed a systematic literature review, which is based on specific keywords in the subject area of social science and humanities, and reviewed articles and press that are published in English. First, we selected database and keywords, then decided on the Scopus database, refined the criteria, reviewed abstract and title, and conducted further snowball sampling to derive 29 papers that are relevant in context of our study to discuss elements of co-creation. So taking these 4 different perspectives, ranging from literature to co-creators all together, and investigate what is important in terms of facilitating co-creation, we derive 35 unique co-creation elements ranging across 5 different factors, namely co-creator engagement, relationship management, operating principle, design layout, and data collection approach. So these 35 co-creation elements are split across 5 different factors. To dive a little bit deeper into each of these critical factors, I would like to introduce co-creator engagement. These 7 elements are listed here, and I would like to give you an example of social context. So we found in the literature that it says we position the customer in a social context. Different customers may perceive the same service differently, and the same customer might perceive the service differently between occasions in a different social context. So the literature speaks about social context in this factor. On the other hand, we have operating principle, which is almost the recipe of a living lab. And it's defined by 8 different elements. One of them is the informal and casual atmosphere, which is highlighted by the companies who have said during the workshop that it has to be informal and casual, which is extremely difficult to achieve, and not everyone can create this atmosphere. I think the idea of Joseph's to achieve exactly this is executed really well. So the companies here say that this is really important in order to facilitate co-creation in informal and casual atmosphere. Also, the Living Lab says it is basically the possibility to give feedback within the team. There is this atmosphere that these problems can be talked about with your colleagues and then improved. So although they take a slightly different position, it is still about a casual atmosphere to exchange information, which is very important also for the Living Lab staff. Then there is a clear explanation of the Living Lab concept, which, for instance, the co-creator are highlighting, and they say It is key to understand the concept of JOSAS in order to enter the Living Lab in the first place, participate and leave feedback. So it is very different to any other shop floor where you just potentially see a product and then purchase it. Here it's about trying a product or service and leave feedback. And finally, we have the factor data collection approach, which comprises 4 different elements. One of them is interactive, engaging, and tailored data collection tools. So the literature speaks about methods that are applicable for living methods. They must go beyond those already established and implemented in social research. In the case of social living labs, methods must be devoted to being interactive and engaging. We can see similarly co-creators highlighted that there should be a new way of getting feedback. It has to be interactive. So they don't want to fill out a survey. It shouldn't be traditional market research. They want to be engaged and they want to interact. So what we can see mapped in this chart is that a majority of elements, exactly 24, were mentioned only by one perspective. Either literature, living lab companies, or co-creator. But on the other hand, we have only one element which was identified as critical by all those 4 perspectives: literature, living lab companies, and co-creator. And they found that interaction and dialogue between stakeholders is actually key in order to facilitate co-creation. So if we then map these elements or factors against the 4 different perspectives, ranging from no attention in red to navy blue main focus, we can see first that the literature is focusing mainly on co-creator engagement. For instance, what motivates a person to engage in co-creation, but completely neglects the operating principles, so the kind of key ingredients, how to run a living lab and what it takes to make this work. On the other hand, we see that the Living Lab doesn't focus on co-creator engagement at all. The staff didn't mention this as critical, but mention it, the relationship management as one of the key areas to focus on. The companies don't focus on the design layout. They leave it pretty much up to the Living Lab to focus on this. And they focus on the operating principle because they have to defend why they want to use a living lab to further develop and innovate their prototypes instead of traditional market research. Finally, co-creators have no strong focus on any of the 5 factors, but they also do not disregard any of them. So what we can see is that the framework identifies 35 elements that are grouped in 5 critical co-creation categories. And the study offers a deeper and holistic understanding of the factors that are really relevant if you want to engage in co-creation in such an open innovation space. As I mentioned before, there was one element, interaction and dialogue, that has been identified as critical by all different perspectives. And what we can observe as well is that each perspective privileges some factors and neglects others. So this really highlights that companies and living labs have to take a holistic perspective and try to understand the different stakeholders involved in order to cater for their needs. So we can see through our study that we haven't contributed any further factors to co-creator engagement, but we could add 6 additional elements to relationship management, 8 additional elements to operating principle, 4 elements to design layout, and 3 additional elements to data collection approach that have not been mentioned in the literature before. So we can see that there's a large gap between theory and practice, and as well as different stakeholders' perspective appears to exist. At this stage, I would like to highlight an IFM Insight article that is about 10 myths about co-creation, which gives further insights why co-creation might be relevant to your company or your context. if you have any questions, I would welcome them at this point.
Thank you, Katharina.